there. Welcome back to the Going Scared podcast. This is your host, Jessica Honegger, founder of the world-changing brand Noonday Collection. Join us here every week for conversations that will help you live a life of purpose by leaving comfort and going scared. We are coming up to the very end of our habit series. In fact, next week, we're going to close out the season with the habit of reflection. But today, I wanted us to talk about a basic habit that I personally do not have, but that I wanted to at least have the knowledge to have, and that is the habit of lawn care and the habit of gardening. I'll be the first to admit to you, my husband, he grew up with a lawn care business. That is his domain. He's a bit of a perfectionist. It's not an area that I touch at all. But in true Enneagram 7 with a strong 6 wing, I often think about those things that my husband does that if he were not around anymore, I would need to at least know how to do. And that is what I find about certain habits, that if I'm at least empowered with the knowledge of the impact that it can have and what are the basics, that I'm more apt to even implement that habit, AKA skincare. Guys, I'm on week 3 of a nightly routine. Y'all know, if you've been with me since the beginning, that I have never washed my face at night. We're talking I'm washing my face. I am brushing my teeth. I am putting on Retin-A, and I put on sunscreen in the morning, vitamin C. And it was all because I really heard from a professional as a question asker, according to Gretchen Rubin's questions. And so I really wanted the same thing around lawn care. And I knew exactly who I wanted to have on the show, Nicole Burke. I connected with Nicole at a conference a couple of years ago, and her positive energy is absolutely contagious. Nicole's social media following and influence have grown over the past couple of years because she specializes and talks about gardening. She has 2 companies, Rooted Garden Designs, which you'll hear about today. And then where we really spend our time talking about is Gardenery, really that each of us can be empowered to grow our own food. Nicole started out as a garden coach, and after she experienced so much success growing that coaching business, she set up the Garden Coach Society to help other gardeners do that too. And to date, this garden society has trained more than 700 gardeners across North America. I absolutely loved this conversation. I grew so much from the knowledge that she has. Really, this whole idea of caretaking the green space that we have, if we have a green space, if we don't have a green space, if you live in an apartment and you want to have some green space and have a kitchen herb garden, that's what I started this year. It really is a way of living life, a way of seeing life. And I love this idea of growing at the pace of the greens around us who don't strive or toil, but when they're given the right things that they need to grow, they grow in their own time. This was a very, very liberating conversation. Nicole, I'm so excited to talk to you today. You were at the conference that was my final conference before the shutdown. I bet it was yours too.
It was. I look back on that and I can sort. Do you remember that meal? It's like the Last Supper, you know?
Totally.
And we had no idea. We're just like the disciples where they had no clue what was happening.
The mom to mom summit.
Yes. And I remember one of the women who was, who hosted us that evening, she was talking about going back home to Seattle, and how it was the epicenter of COVID. And I was like, people are making such a big deal about this. Like, what are we doing? Little did I know I would return home and my kids would literally not go back to school for a year.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
You're in Illinois.
Yes. So it was such a treat to meet you that day. And little did I know, so many people in my community already knew you. And so I was like, I met this lady. She owns this really cool company. It's like a company for good, and they're like, oh yeah, I have like so much of her jewelry. And it was,
good.
yeah. So it's been really fun. So it's so great to reconnect with you now that feels like we've all kind of woken up out of, a really bad nightmare.
Yes. Yes. Yes, except it wasn't as bad a nightmare for you and your company. Tell us a little bit about your business and what has been the evolution of it during the pandemic.
Yeah, so I am on a mission to get everyone into the garden. My second company, Gardenary, that's literally the meaning of the name is that gardening is ordinary. And so we're trying to help everyone see that, as humans, we're meant to be in the garden at least a little bit. And we do that by training gardeners around the world to become garden consultants to help people in their own local communities and cities learn how to garden. And then my first company is called Rooted Garden. It's based in Houston. We're actually franchising this spring, and we're opening up a couple of new locations. And what we do is just that, we're garden consultants. So we design, install, and maintain raised bed kitchen gardens for our clients.
Gosh,
So I started that in
yeah.
2015 out of my little backyard garden in Houston, Texas. And I started honestly out of necessity. I needed to make a little bit of money. I had been homeschooling and raised the white flag. And I said, I am retiring officially. And so just for a year, we had two of my older kids. We transitioned them through private school before we brought everybody to public. And I needed to pay. I just felt, I needed to help. That wasn't on the budget that year. So I thought, well, if anyone will let me, help them learn to garden or do some gardening and pay me a little bit for it, that would just be a dream job. And so I started in the fall of 15, and Jessica was like, probably, I'm sure you've experienced this with your own business, is just such a surprise when you get to do your dream job. And so
Mm.
more and more people, Houston was just a fantastic place to grow that company. People were so generous, so kind, and so open and welcoming to me. And I was able to grow a really successful business very quickly. So that business is still running. My family relocated to the Illinois area in 2018 for my husband's work. So around the time in 2017 is when I launched Gardenary. So the idea with Gardenary is really the education piece. So to take all the things that I am learning on the ground with our clients and turn it into it's an online education portal that trains gardeners to become consultants, but we also have a membership where gardeners or beginner gardeners from anywhere, you included, can log on and watch courses and get coaching from garden consultants. So we teach salad gardening, herb gardening, kitchen gardening, flower gardening, microgreens, all the stuff. So in 2020, everybody, I don't know, apparently we were all stuck at home and everybody was like, oh, let's grow some food. So it was a really welcome surprise that year. Honestly, it gave me so much hope. It's like such a sign of the goodness of humans. I think that when we were, in such a hard time and so challenged mentally, emotionally, physically, that our instinct was to turn to nature.
Ah,
And
yes.
it really gave me hope. Like, I was like, we are gonna make it, like,
Wow.
as people, we're gonna make it. We know instinctually the things that keep us going and that help us survive. And so not just for my own business, but honestly just for my children, for your children, for the future, it was like, wow, this is so hopeful. So I think the stats are something like 20 million new gardeners in 2020, something like that. So it's pretty cool.
Gosh, that is amazing.
It is. It is.
Well, we're doing a habit series, so I'm sure some listeners right now are like, what does gardening have to do with habits? But first of all, to be a good gardener, you have to have good habits. I mean, that's what you hear all the time, right? People that say, oh, I can't keep a plant alive. Well, they need to just say, well, I don't water. I don't have the habit of watering my plants, or whatever.
Yes. Yes.
And I do feel like there is been this new trend around plants and cactus and succulents and
Yes.
gardening. And so I wanted to start actually with lawn care because I don't want to out myself, but let's just say my husband is from the Midwest, grew up with a giant garden and absolutely does all of our lawn care. And I had this moment a couple weeks ago. This is so morbid, but it's not unlike me to have this thought where I was like, if something were to happen to Joe, I wouldn't know where to begin with this. I mean, I know I would just probably hire someone, but what if I didn't have the money to do that? So I was like, I need to understand what are the good habits for lawn care in its spring. And a lot of us are thinking about that. So I was just curious if we could start with lawn care. And then I'm so excited to talk with you about gardening as well.
Yeah. Okay. So full disclosure, I don't do lawn care. I grew up, I'm one of two daughters, and my father, he definitely, treated us like ladies, but he also was like, you guys are going to do the work of boys. So we literally every Saturday morning, Jessica, kid you not, like got woken up by my dad and had to like mow the lawn, do the weed eating, sweeping, all of it.
That's
And so
awesome.
I swore to my dad, I didn't swear like in a bad,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I
yeah.
said, when I grow up, I will have a yard of gravel. I was like, I'm done, 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 done. Like I've done all the lawn care I'm ever going to do. So that is my disclaimer. I do not mow my yard or anything like that. But I'll give you, here are my kind of off the cuff tips. So a huge thing that so many of us miss, and this is actually, I put this in chapter 4 of my book, Kitchen Garden Revival, is the theme of think about nature. So because we're so used to being able to buy solutions, right? Like to go to the store and buy a bag of something that will fix our problem, that we forget that outside in the yard, we're always working with nature. And nature has a mind of its own, right? As we know with our own bodies and as you're talking about habits, all these things have mechanisms that help them work and survive. And your yard is that way as well. So you want to always be thinking about the way nature works anytime you're doing anything in your yard, whether it's mulching or mowing the yard or weed eating or weeding or planting. If you'll think like slow down for a second before you buy something or do something and think about the way nature actually works, work with it instead of against it, and you'll find yourself much more enjoying the process. So, just a couple of things to go with that. One is in your lawn planting, you don't have to do what everybody does, which is like the lawn itself, like that whole movement
Mm,
is relatively new, like on the scope of like human development. And
mm,
there are lots of alternatives. So if you're in a place where your lawn isn't growing well, or you have like a weedy lawn or this and that, like to research alternatives. And a huge thing that's happening right now is a return to native plants.
mhm,
And the whole idea there with native plants is it's just things that naturally grow in your area. So for most of us, like a typical, grass lawn is not native. Like it's
mm,
not something that would occur in nature on its own. And so just researching, you can go to a local nursery and ask, what are the native plants? What things grow locally in this town and community? And they're going to show you plants that don't need they're like because those are natives, they don't need a lot of water. They're going to work with your sunlight and they're also already acclimated to pest pressures and things that often make, growing things that aren't native difficult. So, a huge thing is just over time, if you can replace things that, are not native to your climate with native plants, you're going to find so much more ease in taking care of your space. So, my sister's in Dallas. She was texting me just the other day. She's like, I need to put some plants in the front. And she has like bushes and, evergreens that are not native to Dallas. And I just encouraged her, I just sent her a list. Like, here's, native plants they're going to be so pretty in your landscape. They'll flower naturally. And she's busy, right? She's a mom, she's a nurse. I mean, she's working. And so I'm like, these are going to mostly take care of themselves.
mm,
So native plants is number one, just as much as you can replace. Second is to again just think about nature. Like if you are cutting a lawn or taking care of a lawn, these are all tiny little plants. Like it's crazy to think about it, but each little blade of grass is a plant. And
wow.
I know, weird, right? And
Yeah.
so, not to cut it down really low, not to cut it in a time when there's high heat or when there's lots of water. So, just being careful at thinking of the plant in its own way that it sustains itself and not like just treating it, I guess, gingerly, just as you would like a plant in the garden So I see a lot of times people will cut down grass really, really low. Well, the way grass grows, is through photosynthesis. And so when you cut down those blades really low, you've essentially taken away their food making mechanism. So a couple simple things like that. But just we'll talk about this with the garden, but plants need sun and they need water. They need airflow and they need tending. So all these things that we have in our yard, the work we do with them is essentially like pruning. We'll talk about this with gardening, but pruning is essentially directing plants' energy. So every time you cut a plant in one direction, you're literally telling the plant to go the other way. And so each time you're working in your yard or doing lawn care, you want to be thinking about that when you're cutting, when you're clipping and cleaning. Just remember you're basically directing the plant's energy. And then the final thing I would say is mulch and natural coverings. So we are in that I call it whenever we're working with Rooted Garden with clients, like I'm like, there goes the blow. Wait, what is it? Mow, blow, go. The mow, blow, go team, and so it's like get all the debris out.
Okay.
The idea is like we want these perfectly clean, no speck left on the lawn. And if you think about nature, that's really not the way nature rebuilds itself. So each and every season, a plant grows to, its fullness, and then it naturally drops all that it's grown, even the fruit, the leaves, everything, leaves it at the bottom of the plant. And, when we're cleaning those things up, we're thinking about the aesthetics, but for the plant, it's literally next year's food. And so those leaves, the fruit, the twigs, all of those things decompose at the base of that plant and then will literally sustain the plant through the coming seasons and provide the food for the coming spring or the next time it's going to grow. And so just being mindful of that, like, even though we may not love the aesthetics, just something simple of keeping fallen leaves around the base of a tree, keeping, mulch around your plants, things like that. Every time you do that, you're going to lower the need for water for those plants. You're going to lower the loss of minerals and vitamins for those plants. You just basically create almost like a system inside of it where the plant can take care of itself and not as much pressure, not as much need is on you because you've set that plant up for success.
You're just helping me reframe oak season right now because
Yep.
everything around Austin right now is yellow. I don't know if y'all went through that in Houston,
Yeah.
but
Pollen.
pollen, no, it's
Yeah.
bad. And everyone's sick right now because of the pollen, and our cars are yellow.
Yeah.
And it is just a hot mess. And we complain about it. But I'm like, oh, this is just nature's way of nurturing itself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a different way. Now I can relate. Like I literally had to get on allergy shots one spring in Houston.
Oh, it's bad.
I was taking like six Benadryl a day. I
Gosh.
have allergy and asthma and we'd been in Houston like 2 or 3 years and it was like that third spring,
Yeah.
it just went crazy. So yeah, so the pollen, what you're seeing right now is the whole growing stage, right? Where the plant is trying to make as much of itself as possible. And it's just really neat to take a step back. And I think we've been groomed. I know I was, to see plants as like they serve us basically, like they have to grow a certain way, do a certain thing. And we're going to, basically tell them exactly what they should do. And I have really, over the last few years, it's been really neat to kind of step back and see plants as a living, like what do you call it? Like a classification of living things that is equal to animals
Mm.
and really starting to appreciate their wildness and just honestly their ability to thrive despite us
Mm.
and all the things we do to them, but also kind of watching them in awe, kind of being an observer rather than, kind of fighting it and watching to
Really,
see.
it's a consumer mentality, which I have to tell you, that's why I think I wanted to have you on because I'm wanting to my husband is process oriented and I am outcome oriented. So I'm always the one when we go to the nursery, I'm like, buy the biggest gallon thing possible because I don't want to have to wait for it to grow.
Yes, me too.
And last year, there was this giant freeze and Texas got whatever 5 inches, 12 inches of snow, and everything died. I mean, it was awful. It was quite
Yeah,
sad,
it
especially
was.
since we were already going through such a hard time. Well, we have clumping bamboo, which is a certain bamboo I think that was created for our climate. So I don't know if it's not native, but I think it was created. I don't know how that works. Like
Yeah.
in a
I know.
lab? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have a lot of that, and it just died. I mean, we're talking it was just brown, crisp, nothing there, and it's literally what surrounds, the fencing of our yard. It what helps me feel like we're in a lush place because we're right in an urban area. And my husband, who does all of our lawn care, went out one day and just cut it all down, just because there was nothing there. And I had already been researching how much it would cost to replace. I was trying to, because everyone was rushing to do that. So I was trying to find people in other states that maybe could get and I was ready to I wanted my green lush yard back
Yeah.
yesterday. I
Yeah.
wanted it back. And felt impatient and I felt disappointed. And my husband comes running in to me after he's cut everything down. He goes, "It's alive."
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
I walk outside and I am expecting this is actually before he cut it down. I'm expecting that he realized that it's all alive and it's all just gonna go green again,
Mhm. Mhm.
And then he points to this tiny, little, tiny root that's
Oh.
growing out of the ground. And he was literally in tears and
Oh.
amazed that this bamboo had survived and it's gonna make it. And I was like, forget it. No way. That's just one little root. What are you talking about? I went lush yesterday, and he was so upset that I had that reaction. And now 1 year later, our bamboo is fully back. I mean, it's just
Oh,
like
that's amazing.
it's
What
all
a great
back. So
story.
there really is something about it's a mentality, the gardening mentality. Actually taking care, how we can take care of our lawns. But I do have a question because I did buy some native stuff for our lawn, post the freeze, and it hasn't taken off at all. And I think it's kind of like it's kind of dead. Like, oh, it was
Oh,
officially
bummer.
dead.
Do
Yeah.
you know
So
where
I
you
don't.
got it?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I forget the name of it.
But was it
Um,
like a local place?
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
bummer. I
So
would go
great.
back to them.
Because
Either
yeah. So tell me about that. What do we need to look for when we're purchasing things that we're going to plant?
so
Yeah.
my first answer typically when someone tells me that they planted something and it died is usually not always, but usually I can trace it to a big box store.
Okay.
So our garden industry, now this is probably not true if you got it at a local nursery, but the garden industry, like if you walk to Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever right now, you're going to see flowers everywhere, right? Like all the pots will be just over, like just full of blooms. And most local nurseries may do this as well. And the reason why they do that is because marketing, right? Like no one wants to buy green, they want to buy the color. But what they've done to those plants, unless stated otherwise, like literally probably unless there's a label on that plant, they have used synthetic fertilizers to get the plant to bloom in that small pot. And they've, basically forced the growth of that plant at an early point in the plant's life. And so what will happen, and this happened to me, all my first plants I ever bought as I started gardening is I would plant them, put them in this, in the space in the garden, and they would sit there. They wouldn't necessarily die, but they would never do anything more. And that's because I wasn't fertilizing them, with synthetics. I was just either watering them or, just taking care of them naturally. And the plants, honestly, they don't know what to do. It's just like, if we take ourselves off of a drug or, something that we had grown accustomed to our body having, and then suddenly it's not there. And so generally that's there's a huge disconnect. That's honestly what started me as a garden consultant is there's this huge disconnect between buying something from the store, which most of us do, and then it actually staying alive.
That
you
is
know,
so
it's
interesting.
it's so different than buying a couch, right? Or like all these other investments we make in our homes. Those things are not going to die. They might
Right.
get stained or something, but like they're not living things. And plants are so different in that way. So to market them to us, to make them desirable to us, they do a lot of things to them to make the plants look desirable. But then because we have no idea the way those plants were cared for, we don't do the same thing. And then those plants, either underperform or die, where we've placed them. Now, in your case, since you bought locally from a local nursery, I would go back to them and I would say, like, I bought, a native plant. This is what happened. Here's a picture. And ask them, something could have happened, let's say in the timing, like of when the plant got transplanted. All plants, when you bring them into the garden, whether it's a raised bed garden or your ornamental landscape, they're all going to be the most sensitive in the first 2 weeks to 4 weeks after planting. It's just like bringing a baby home from, the hospital. Those first few weeks are just very fragile, and you just have to watch them and care for them pretty much daily. So watching the watering that you're doing, making sure they're, not dropping leaves, like they're transitioning into their new space. My husband and I, we have a joke, like plants are called plants for a reason because they like to be planted. Like it's like just literally in their genes. They're not like, it's not in their DNA to move, right? Like they are, if you think about nature, plants never move from a space.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do as humans, like they're growing these in nurseries in small pots, potting them up to a bigger pot. Then you take it home from a big pot and put it into the ground. And so that's at least 3 to 4 times that plant has gotten replanted. And it's just really against the plant's nature. So that period of time, that first 3 to 4 weeks is pretty crucial. And then who knows, like maybe for you, I don't know if it could have been the freeze that even happened this year, but I would definitely go back to the nursery. And I encourage anyone anywhere when they're buying any kind of plants, even if it is from a big box store, you should always ask them how they've grown those plants. And it doesn't even have to be from like a detective standpoint. It can just simply be from, can you help me understand how I should care for this plant when I get it home?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. But I mean, I found out so many things. Like when I moved here, I was unfamiliar with the nurseries, and I was doing a workshop at Anthropology on herb gardening. And so I went to this local nursery, and all these herbs looked so gorgeous. And I was like walking through with the lady helping me. And I was like, wow, these herbs look amazing. How do you guys grow them? And she's like, well, do you see that little drip tube up at the top, like all throughout our greenhouses? I'm like, uh-huh. And she's like, so that's got Miracle-Gro in it. And we pump it out to the plants every single day, like from the time that we start them. And she goes, and that's why we don't drink the water out of the hose. And I was like, okay, I'll be leaving now. But I never would have known that, Jessica. Like there was no sign. And so if I had taken those plants home, I would not have treated them in that way. And so those plants would most likely just sit there just as they were for the entirety of the growing season.
All right, parents, one of the habits that we've talked about is the habit of finances, and it doesn't come more responsible than life insurance. And Fabric is designed for responsible humans with kids. They exist to tackle those keep you up at night lists and help families plan for their future. Fabric has made life insurance easy, and yet they believe that parents need even more. So they've got it all covered, from wills to college savings to the tools that keep your family's finances in sync. It's built for parents to manage their family's financial future stress-free, and you can actually manage it all with Fabric. I don't know if you're an Enneagram 7 with a 6 wing or a 6 with a 7, or if anxiety is any part of your story, but I'm probably not the only one who randomly imagines worst case scenario for our family. That's a bit morbid. I'm just keeping it real. Fabric is a place where when I go to those places in my mind, I can rest assured that certain things that are easy to not take care of are actually being taken care of. Protect your family with term life insurance now in just 10 minutes. Apply today at meetfabric.com/scared. That's meetfabric.com/scared. MEET fabric.com/scared. Fabric Insurance Agency policies issued by Vantis Life, not available in New York and Montana. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. So let's talk fertilizer then.
Okay, think about nature. I don't do a lot of fertilizing. If I do, I literally just try to imitate nature. So my favorite, like all my students in garden area, I'm like compost, 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 because I really do. I use compost for everything. I don't use mulch I'll use mulch in like an ornamental garden, but in a fruit garden, like in our kitchen gardens, I use compost as mulch. So again, I'm just trying to imitate nature. So I know that in nature, a plant drops, leaves and fruit, and those things decompose. And when they decompose, even when they drop, animals come and eat from them. Actually, I go into this in detail in my book in chapter 4. So you've got this really unique mixture of decaying plant matter, existing soil that already was there, and then animal poop, right? Because you've got you're going to have squirrels and birds and raccoons and rabbits and all these things. If the plant was out in nature, you'd have those animals come and dig around your plant, eat the fruit, eat some of the leaves. And then, animals are animals, so they poop.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what you want to think about anytime you're fertilizing your plant. You want to think decomposed plant mass and animal excrement, or whatever the proper term of that. When we're sounding fancy, we don't say the word poop, but basically you want poop. So earthworm castings, chicken manure, bat guano. You want to make sure that the
Where do you get
manures,
all this stuff from?
well, garden centers definitely have them. You can order online, but I would honestly recommend going to a local center. You're going to save on shipping and you'll get a more local product. But earthworm castings, I mean, you can make your own so easily, just in a simple, I mean, we're getting into the weeds here a little bit, but earthworm casting bins is like a super easy way that you can turn basically all of your kitchen scraps into fertilizer. And you can put it on anything like indoor plants, outdoor plants, food gardens. It gets a little dicey. Like you can learn a lot more about it, but it can get a little messy. You have to kind of make sure you keep the balance of carbon in there. You can, if it's too food heavy, like if you're doing too much kitchen scraps and not enough, say, newspaper kind of thing, it gets a little too mushy. But just simple things like that. But even just looking into local places that have chicken manure or earthworm castings. I mean, the cool thing to think about is like these are like natural byproducts of a lot of things that are already created in our food systems. So, like chicken manure, for instance, the other products that you can use are things like bone meal and blood meal. I'm not a big meat person, and I have some clients who are vegetarians and vegans, and they'll say, well, don't put any animal products in my garden, because I'm vegan. And I'm like, well, I
You're
mean,
robbing plants of,
well,
yeah,
I'm like, I understand if you don't want to consume an animal. I'm like, but plants have to have animals. Like
yeah,
plants and animals coexist together.
depend
We
on each
need each
other.
other. Exactly. And so plants need animal byproducts. Like that's what helps them thrive. So that's just what you want to think about. The quick answer, like if you just want a super easy answer, is compost. Like it's such an easy thing. It's such a natural byproduct. And talking about leaves, as we were mentioning, everyone can pile up leaves in the fall and let them decompose over the winter. And you'll get this incredible compost. It's called leaf mold compost. And it is one of the richest composts you can use for plants. So there's I mean, you can go really, really deep into
I'm sure.
fertilizer.
I'm
But
sure.
if you just think, I honestly never even hardly use the word fertilizer because it kind of has this, it has this connotation of like Miracle Grow with it. And instead, I just always talk about, just thinking about nature. Think about what a plant would do, how it would break down in nature and feed itself for the coming season. And you just want to replicate that as much as possible.
Okay, so my son and husband have a raised garden in the front yard. I say my son and husband because I only participate if something happens to grow and I like to harvest things.
I love it.
And then our next door neighbor, same, right next to us, raised garden. And so I know they're always out front. And I mean, I definitely go and water if, they ask me to or whatever. But we are always perplexed about why isn't this growing and why is that not growing? And basil is like so easy, but how come sometimes the tomatoes work and sometimes they don't? And then my best friend lives 2 blocks away, so same climate. Her garden is gangbusters. But now that you're explaining that it is about sort of the very beginning, she actually harvested her own seeds during the winter in her garage and then planted them directly into her garden. So I'm wondering if that contributed. But what's it? I don't understand. Like, why do so many of us, so we blame Texas? Many of us are just like, Texas is just impossible here,
Right.
because
Right.
it's true. Like my family from the Midwest, I mean, my gosh, you throw something in the ground and it's like, it's insane their garden come August. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. So, what do those of us maybe that are in these tougher climates, and you can compare the two from Illinois to Texas, what do the different climates, what do we need to be aware of, I guess, at the very beginning stages of managing and growing a garden? And I know this is a huge question, but maybe just the 101.
Yes, 101. Okay, so I have a couple of things. One, I'm going to send you my book if you don't have a copy yet, because that'll help if with setup if you need it.
Thank you.
So Kitchen Garden Revival, it will talk to you a lot about setup. I tell everyone the garden is, first of all, it's very dynamic. So even if you have a fantastically successful year in the garden this year, that does not mean that it will be the same next year. And I've experienced that just in my 4 years here in the Chicago area. And that is what makes gardening so fun and addictive, right? Because as humans, we love like my son, he loves a video game. Why? Because he never knows how it's going to turn out. And he's always, he finishes a game and he's like, I wonder if I could do it better. And so, one thing to just relax into that I would love to send to your going scared people is enjoy the process and kind of relax into the uniqueness of gardening. It is you joining hands with nature, and that is going to be a wild ride.
Mm.
And so, I think a big thing we put on ourselves is performance. Like we're looking
Yeah, we're
for
definitely good. Like we'll joke about being in competition in our front
yes.
yard gardens.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people bring that with them from career, from motherhood, from just society and life, our bodies, whatever. And we bring that same kind of mentality to the garden. And when we do that, we miss the joy that is there. And so I'll preface all these like pointers with that is really seeing gardening as a very unique kind of activity and hobby and thing that we do as humans in that we are, it is partly our responsibility and it is so much more nature's responsibility and kind of letting that be a teacher for you in other parts of your life. So I'll just put that out there. Okay, so knowing that it's dynamic, it's going to change every year. There's a lot of factors at play. I have found over the years that you can tie success in the garden to three things: timing, setup, and consistency. So
Habits.
that's right. So the first is setup. I have worked with so many gardeners, beginner gardeners through Rooted Garden and through Gardenary who've never gardened before. And I teach them how to set up their garden in the first place. So, where to put it, how big it should be, how to clear the space, how to build the bed, how to create the soil, how to do irrigation, all those pieces and parts. And people, Jessica, who've literally never grown, like one of my clients, I love her. She's like, my house was known as where the dead fern grows. And her name's Anu. She's one of our Rooted Garden clients, and she's a vegan. She's also a businesswoman, and she cooks out of her garden every night now. And
Wow.
yeah, and so much of that was the setup. Like she was trying to what we a lot of us do is like buy some plants and just kind of stick them somewhere. Setup is just like, say, for your other habit. I was listening to your interview with like Nicole Walters, and or all these other healthy habits, right? It's all about environment, like she
Right.
talked about like getting a plan from a doctor. And
Mhm.
the garden is very similar. Like there are people who know how to do it, and who've done a lot of them. And so getting help and or getting instruction and setting your garden up right in the first place will save you so much frustration, but also time and money. We have
That
so
makes
many
sense.
clients who, yeah, they hire us And we come in and they're like, my yard guy did this. And we're like, it's in the wrong place. It's way too wide. It's not tall enough, you know?
Mm.
So setup's big. So if you will slow down and set up right, you'll have so much more fun. The next is timing. We all have very unique seasons. Like you have really different seasons in Austin than I have in Chicago. And so, like, you can be growing tomatoes right now, and I can't plant tomatoes outside until after Mother's Day.
Mm.
So, getting the timing right, all plants have in their DNA a little time, a little clock that tells them when the temperature is just right and when it's time to grow to its fullness. And then they also have, little clocks in there that tell them when it's time to shut down. And so the big box stores do us zero favors here. I'm guessing, I could be wrong, but I know in Houston, like if I went to Lowe's in July, they would have tomatoes and cilantro in the garden center. And neither of those should be planted anywhere near July in Houston. So cilantro needs to go in the garden around October, and tomatoes need to go in the garden around August or February. A lot of times people think it's their fault or they don't know how to grow such and such when really it's the timing.
Mm.
So you have in Austin like a cool season, a warm season, and a hot season. And there are plants that love to grow in each of those seasons. So getting those plants, I call it the optimal season. So you really want those plants in very early, as early as possible at the beginning of the optimal season. And then you really want to remove those plants from the garden once they pass the optimal season.
Mm.
So that's timing. And then finally, consistency. And, plants can't move. And so they need us to bring the resources to them. So it's just like any other habit, just making it a small part of your everyday. Like I talk to students about, going out there with coffee, and you want to have things in your garden that make you want to go out there. So we talk about planting lots of varieties in the garden, lots of herbs and greens alongside your tomatoes so that you want to go out there and pick things. And
Mm-hmm.
then while you're out there, picking and harvesting, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a slug, or I need to cut this little diseased leaf off the squash or something like that. So, any kind of habit that you already do that you can tie the garden to and just make it a part of at least your weekly schedule will make a really big difference. So, even things like we talked about today, like with compost, just having a schedule where you add compost to your plants every 2 months or something like that. And then finally, I have this continuum that I teach about growing plants. So if you have someone listening now who is a beginner gardener, this is great for them, or experience. But basically, if you pretend that there's like this diagonal line going up into the air, that line represents plant needs, which includes sunlight, space, time, and tending. And the really neat thing to know about that line is there are plants all along that line. So there's plants at the bottom that don't need a lot of sun, don't need a lot of care, don't need a lot of water or space. And then there are plants at the top that have a lot of needs. And a big mistake a lot of us do as gardeners is we start with tomatoes. And those are pretty high up on that line. They need a lot of space, they need a lot of care, they need a lot of sun. And you mentioned, it was interesting, you mentioned sometimes our tomatoes don't do great, but our basil does awesome. Well, basil's at the bottom of that line. It's a plant that doesn't need a lot of space, doesn't need a lot of time,
And
and really
mint,
doesn't need a
basil
lot
and
of tending.
mint and
Yes,
rosemary. Oh my God, no!
exactly.
It's like, oh, there it is.
Exactly. So we tell everyone start with herbs, then move to leafy crops like salad greens, kales, things like that. And then you move to root crops. Those have a little bit higher level of needs. And then those fruiting crops, are really last. So it's totally fine if someone wants to start with a tomato, but like to go to your habits focus here, that's essentially like, let's say if we were doing an interview right now about running, and I said, all right, everyone go out and do a 6 miler. Okay. Like just that's how you're going to get started. Just go buy your tennis shoes. I know you've never run before. Just walk out the door, do a 6 miler. I mean, actually, while you're at it, go ahead and do like a half marathon. And that's the equivalent that we're doing when we jump to growing watermelon and tomatoes and, these bigger plants and fruiting plants. They sound much more exciting and impressive, but it really is equivalent to, jumping into a sport and going all in.
Hmm. That is so good. Oh my gosh, this was so helpful. I could talk to you for hours, but I already just feel just a little bit more empowered. And I am not a gardening type. I mean, not that there should be types. It's just, I'm like, but I do know that the practice of it would be so grounding for me. And I think I just always saw it as like my husband and son's thing, and I wanted to feel like it could be my thing too. So that's why that's why I wanted to talk to you. And I was like, well, I'm sure some of my listeners are also in this position of, you know, what are the habits that we can have around the nature that we live. It's literally our plot of nature that we live on, And I want to tend to that. And I think that matters. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it was so fun. Thank you so much for having me, Jessica.
I'm curious if you just got curious about gardening. Thank you so much for tuning into today's show. Our music is by Ellie Holcomb, and I'm Jessica Honegger. Until next time, let's take each other by the hand and keep going scared.